Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening today. Today's going to be a lot different than anything I've done in the past, and that's because I lost my father this week. And so today's going to be storytelling, some memories, good and bad, maybe. I'm hoping I won't say anything that will make somebody in my family angry. Granted, my family will probably never listen to this podcast, but yeah, I want to talk about my dad. He was a heavy hitter in my life, silent and deadly. He's that guy that never really said much, and yet somehow he impacted me in ways I really had never noticed until he died. It was almost like, oh yeah, I was reminded the day he died that there are certain parts of me that I admittedly admire about myself that are remnants of him. And so because of him passing away this week in the schedule, I had to push back a couple of guests that I had scheduled this week. And, it just made sense that maybe I use this as catharsis. As a memorial to him. So I'm just going to talk for a bit, and I hope you don't mind. So my dad, his name was Robert Leland Jones, and that's my name if you know me well. And I'm the junior, not the second because that would be foofy, but the junior. And Dad was born in 1939 down in Fresno, California, and he was the second of three children to my grandfather's first marriage. And what I recently discovered was that I didn't know this. I mean, this is amazing. I'm 49. I'm going to be 50 in a few weeks. And I didn't know until a year ago that my father had an older sister. I had always known he had had a younger sister, Patty, and she passed away, I think, 15, 20 years ago now. But he had a younger sister. Her name was Joyce. And Joyce died, I believe, when she was 2. She might have been a little older than that, maybe 3. I don't have my dad to ask the story. And both Grandpa and Grandma Jones have long since passed. But she was run over by a car. And that was a really, really devastating thing for that family, and as you can imagine. And my dad, in some ways, bore the brunt of that. His parents divorced, and then shortly thereafter, my grandfather remarried and had 5 more children, my aunts and uncles. And my dad never really fit in. Like it or not, whether we want to discuss the ugliness of what it's like to be a child, in a new household with all these other children, but Dad was the eldest of that group of those 7. But Patty, my oldest aunt, my dad's younger sister, she was mentally disabled, and she went somewhere. I'm not exactly sure to this day where she went or why she went away. But my father was the loner first kid in this new brood of children, and never fit in, and was always on the fringes. And I'm sure my aunts and uncles, who are all still living, may or may not remember all of that, but my dad, whether he said it out loud or not, was definitely lived on the fringes, and was forced to do a lot of things he didn't want to do, and was always told he was never as special as the other 5. And if the other 5 hear this, I'm so sorry that is maybe coming out now, but that is how he was told. Whether he shared that with you in his last days, I don't know. But My dad never felt special and spent the rest of his life buying and gathering to fill some hole, some God-sized hole he was never going to fill because he never got the love from his parents that he wanted. He just never got it. And that sucks. That sucks a lot. Anyway, my dad grew up and went to high school down in Graham, Washington, which is now a city. Back then it was unincorporated. And he went to Bethel High School, graduated in 1958. My mom actually went to the same high school, 2 years his junior, and they didn't know each other. They knew of each other in high school. My dad went off to the military. I think, to get away from his family. Didn't want to raise horses, which is what they were sort of on the path to doing. My grandfather was in sales, and my father just really, he needed to get away. He needed to become independent and do his own thing. And he joined the army, went overseas, ended up in Germany, Austria, Paris. I know that's a city compared to the other countries, but loved Paris, talked about Paris a lot. And I think he had a girlfriend over there because he always hinted at sort of a lost love that was left over there. But came back to the States after he did his 2-year stint and met my mother. Actually met her, got to know her. And I think he recognized something in my mother, the same sort of thing that my mother had rested on the fringes of her family, that it was also a broken family from divorce, and that her mother had remarried, and she was always sitting on the side and never the one that was the focal point of that family. And my mother and father were drawn to each other because they recognized those holes in their hearts and in their lives, and they got together, and within 6 months they were married, and that's great because I ultimately ended up being a product of that. They had me almost 4 years later, which is crazy. And if my mom, I'm already thinking in my head, I could tell stories I want to tell, but I know I shouldn't, so I'm going to stop. But how I came about is a pretty interesting and hilarious story. And I was born 9 months to the day, and my birthday's September 30th, so if you count back 9 months, you can figure that's New Year's Eve, and that's actually a really cool story. But I was born, and my brother was born in 1968, and we moved a lot. My dad was a mechanic and a car salesman, and he had a lot of responsibilities in that he was always going to where new dealerships were being formed or built, and he was helping establish them and establishing their sales forces. And he was a key part of Mazda's early days. And we moved everywhere. I'm 49 years old, and I've lived in 51 places in my life, 51. And I would say the majority of them were probably before I was 30. Granted, the majority of them I should actually say are my fault because I did a lot of things and moved a lot too. But we did move a lot when I was a kid. And I don't really remember much, of course, because you don't remember when, you're 2, 3, 4 years old. But I do remember moving finally when I was 7 years old to Wenatchee, Washington. And we moved in the dead of winter, and my dad had rented a U-Haul, and we were driving east on I-90. And Dad was like, "Hey, we're going to go around this way because we don't want to deal with the passes. They're too steep, too dangerous. It was very snowy." And he took a wrong turn and ended up taking us over the steepest pass in the Cascades, which is Blewett Pass, a very, very steep, sharp up and down pass. And at the time, it was very much a 2-lane, windy pass and very scary. And we're driving a U-Haul. There's 4 of us in the truck. And I'm sitting on the bench seat next to my dad and my brother between me and my mother. And And of course, what is this, 1974? Nobody's wearing a seatbelt. I mean, come on. Nobody wears a seatbelt in 1974. And I remember just going through that pass, being terrified. And I guess the reason I'm trying to share this is because my dad was definitely, he had a little bit of a know-it-all syndrome, right? I think a lot of it came from growing up the way he grew up and not having say. And so when he was married to my mother, all of a sudden he could say, well, this is the way it is, and this is what we're going to do, and I'm right. And so instead of going around the long way, which would have gotten us there safely, he did get us there, but it wasn't anything but safe as we went, and it was very, very scary, and I remember that. But anyway, we moved to Wenatchee, and then we lived there for a few years. Kind of a, I don't know, mellow time. First time I lived in a warm environment. It was always rainy and cold where I had lived previously over in Chehalis. And it was nice. It was a really, really nice period of our lives. And I remember my dad decided to buy a boat. He decided he needed a boat to fill the hole in his life. And he bought a little 17.5-foot glass par, which I have no idea what that is. It's probably very much an off brand. And then decided to take us to Lake Chelan. He's going to learn right on the job. We bought the boat. He learned how to back it into the lake, and next thing I know, we're cruising up the lake to go the 55-mile length and go up to Stehekin and just check it out. And on the return, we decided to stop at this place called Wapato Point. And back then, before it was developed, it was just a spit, the sandy spit that stuck out into Lake Chelan. But this day was a little different. We pulled off, and I remember my brother and I were playing on the in the lake. So our shorts, our swimsuits got very wet, and all of a sudden the clouds rolled in, and my father said, "Well, we better get on the boat and we better get going." And I remember getting out into the lake, into the middle of the lake. And if anybody knows about Lake Chelan, they know it's a very, very deep lake and a very dangerous lake, especially when windstorms come through. Well, we had a windstorm come through that was one of those end of the world windstorms. And it whipped up waves that were probably 6 to 8 feet tall. And when you're in a 17-foot boat, that is hell on earth. And I remember as clear as a bell, the boat being tossed in a way that I knew I was going to die. I knew it. And my dad immediately turned the boat off to the left, and we ended up bashing our boat into a person who, they lived on the lake there. They had their own dock, and they had seen us, and so they were screaming for us out at the dock, and we came over, and Dad kind of lashed the boat to the dock, and he got us safely on the land, and we spent the evening having dinner with a family we had never met that sort of somehow kind of magically saved our lives that night, along with my dad's quick thinking. The point of the story was that, again, my dad had said, well, I know what's right and I know what's best, and meanwhile, he risked our lives by taking our boat out into the middle of the lake during a storm. This is very common with my dad. My dad was famous for making choices that were wildly inappropriate, and famous for sticking to them at all costs. Meaning, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. We're gonna go down with the ship, but this is the way it's gonna be, because pride was so large. Probably again because he had always felt so small at home as he grew up, and now was a chance to, be right at all costs. And those were mistake-filled times. My dad was pretty young then, born in 1939. What was he, 35 when we were doing this? So still young. Cued a few years later, we moved again to a little town called Tonasket up in the north central Washington, and it was the best time of my life personally. It was a very, very difficult time for my dad because the automobile industry was going through, a tough event. It was the end of the 70s and, the end of the gas crunch, the first gas crisis, the oil crisis, but now going into the first real financial sort of meltdown that had occurred in the late 70s, early 80s. And then the gas prices shot through the roof and nobody was buying cars. And so we didn't know what to do. But meanwhile, at least on Sundays, we were going to the lake, right? We were still going to Lake Chelan. We were going on family drives. We were going to Lake Chehalis. And, even my dad worked way too much. He worked way, way too much. I totally have dad issues. So here I'm a 49-year-old, and I can admit proudly, I have daddy issues. And I have them because regardless of how loving my father was to me, he was never home. He worked every day, 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. at night. We'd eat dinner late. And then we were kind of rushed off to bed because, he grew up with this thinking that we should go to bed early. And I'm cool with that. It was never an issue. But I really didn't get dad time. And when we went to the lake on weekends, that was the only time we got him. But he didn't want to talk. He just was very introverted in that way, very, very private. And, as I got older, that changed a bit. But as a child, I didn't really learn much from my dad. I mean, my dad can build a house. My dad could build a car. He could take apart anything. He could build anything. It was crazy how practical and handy he was. And he didn't teach me any of it, none of it. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. I can barely change oil in my car. I mean, I have to hire somebody to do all these things. Now, the fact is I don't like doing them. But I think part of the reason I don't like doing them is because I was never taught to enjoy them. I never had been pushed enough to enjoy them, to learn them. But I will say this, as an aside, is my father and mother clearly knew that my skills were musical, that I was an entertainer, that I was an artist, that I love playing drums. I love playing drums. And my dad did everything he could to make sure that I worked on that I developed that skill. And when we were living in Wenatchee, again, to go back a little bit, my dad bought me a really nice little blue Slingerland kit that I pounded into submission. And he made sure that he always checked with our neighbors wherever we moved. It was a really big sticking point that he would actually go to the neighbors' houses before we moved in, before we actually even bought the houses. He would ask them, hey, now my son plays drums. Would that be okay with you if, we move in because he's going to be playing drums? And just, we keep it under control, but would that be okay? And they'd always say yes. And that was really nice. He was looking out for me. He was looking out for my brother. He always made sure that our needs were met wherever we moved. And so he built a lot of what we did as far as where we lived, what neighborhoods we moved into, based around his family's needs, my mother, myself, and my brother. And I can't give enough kudos for that. I mean, that's an amazing thing. So cut to 1981, and we had a really hard time selling our house because of the gas crisis, all these other things that were going on. Maybe even the hostage crisis in 1980 affected it. I don't know. But nobody wanted to move to this little town of 964 people in eastern Washington. And so my father took a job in Yakima and was gone from the family for a year. And so there you go again, right? The daddy issue with my dad was gone. And we would see him every couple of months. We would drive 5 hours to go see him and then stay for the weekend, then come back. And so in a really formative period of my life, I was missing my father. And he was working for a Mazda and Volvo dealership in Union Gap down there south of Yakima. And he had a really cool apartment, pool. We'd never owned a pool in our lives, so that was kind of cool. And we'd visit him a lot. But we finally sold our house after a year and a half of being on the market, and we moved to Yakima. And within 3 months of living in Yakima, my dad lost his job, and we moved to Olympia. And that was absolute insanity. The day we moved to Olympia was Halloween, 1981. And within a few days of living there was a major storm, a very, very violent storm that came through the town. And had knocked over all these trees and branches on our house. And I'll never forget this because my dad's standing out on top of the house in 70-mile-an-hour winds, making sure the roof was clean so we wouldn't have water damage. So he was always out doing something, risking his life to keep his family safe from, I don't know, water dripping. I don't know to this day, but he just felt it was important. And that was it. Q to 1982, one of the most indelible things ever happened to our family. We were coming back home from a very, very late night visit to my grandmother's house. And on the drive home, we were hit head on by a drunk driver. And my dad was in the passenger seat and my mother was driving. My dad had leg cramps and my brother and I were in the back seat sleeping. And all of a sudden, violent, just destruction hit. And I was thrown forward, broke my tailbone. My brother had damage to his kidneys. Same with my mother. My father's face hit the windshield. And it was terrifying because, well, his face hit the windshield. And he turned around. There was blood everywhere. And I remember being so shocked. I can still see it, talking about it, that I was really hoping my dad wouldn't die. I was really, really hoping. And it took an hour and a half for the ambulance to get there. They finally got there and took us to the hospital. And, we all healed. We all recovered. Which it's interesting telling this story because it actually reminds me of another event with my father, which I have to tell. So let's go back 15 years because back in 1972, we lived in Chehalis and we had this property that was on a hillside and we had these fruit trees at the top of the hill. And the fruit trees had this really bad issue. I don't know if it was the weather. It was a very, very wet environment that we lived in, Chehalis. And the fruit trees had tons of caterpillars. And of course, they formed these nests and they destroyed the fruit trees. And that would just make my father crazy. And so he had this habit of burning the caterpillar nests out of the trees. And one day he took that 2x4 and he put a oil-soaked rag on the end like he always did, and he stuck it up into the tree, and it fell off the end and landed on his face. And I'll never forget hearing my mom scream as I looked out the window up the hill to see basically the Ghost Rider running down the hill. It's not funny. It is funny in the sense now. It wasn't certainly funny then, but my father's head was on fire. And they rushed him into the bathroom and got him in the shower and started squirting cold water on him. And we went to the burn ward at the local hospital that afternoon. And they assessed him and put a lot of, I don't know, whatever they put, gauze and goop on him and sent him home, which just blows my mind because it seems so archaic, right? It seems like caveman therapy that my father would get these second-degree burns and they just send him home that night. But I'll never forget, we were sitting at the dinner table and my dad smelled terrible because the smell of burning flesh is a terrible smell. And my brother and I were arguing that neither of us wanted to sit next to him for dinner. That's the first memory. The second memory of Chehalis, and which has instilled in me a massive, massive, massive fear of bees. Hornets, bees, you name it. Anything small, yellow, and black scares the heck out of me. And my father had an inordinate, is that a word? He had a terrible, terrible fear of bees. And for whatever reason, the same thing with the caterpillar, he had found this giant hornet's nest over in a holly tree on the edges of our property. And he knew bees, or I should say in this case, hornets, are dormant in the evening. They're all in their nests. They're not flying around. They're not pollinating. They're not stinging and hurting things. And my dad decided, I'm going to burn that hornet's nest in the middle of the night. And for some crazy reason, he got us all up. And we're talking, my brother and I were in bed. And my dad got us up, marched us out to the tree. And in the middle of the night, it's probably midnight. It was very dark. He lights this 2x4 on fire with, the oil-soaked rag on the end. And he sticks it right square into the center of this hornet's nest. And then I swear to God, in slow motion, he turns to me and my mother and my brother and says, "Run." What dad does that? But my dad did. Run. So he invites us out to watch him torture a hornet's nest and then tells us to run so we don't get stung. That is the insanity of Bob Jones. That is my dad. And none of us were stung. That was great. And it's probably because the hornets were flying around or popping like popcorn because they were all dying. But yeah, I've never, ever been able to get over my fear of any kind of bee or wasp or hornet because of that silly, stupid moment that my dad thought was really cool. What a maniac. Anyway, cut back to Olympia. We lived there for a number of years, and it was great. Graduated high school there, thank God. Moved to Portland, went to college. So that was my first experience away. But he always made a point of helping me out. So whenever I had any issues, I had to move from a dorm to a house, or had an issue with my girlfriend and had to move out from that place to another house, he was always there with my mom to pick me up and help me out. He just always helped out. He was always, always, always there. And then I joined the Navy and got married, and life went on. Meanwhile, he and Mom moved down to Ocean Shores, which is where they lived until he passed. And they lived in a couple different houses down there. They finally had a dream house, and that was pretty cool. They lived in this really cool place right on this lake down there, and it was really lovely. And then the floor fell out from underneath my dad. He lost his job at a bank. And he went through a really, really bad state of depression. And, there was even, I wouldn't say threats, but there was definitely the implication that he would rather die, that he'd rather kill himself. He just really, really had kind of given up hope. And that was a really tough time for him, really tough time for my mom because she had to deal with it. But they end up moving out of that house and moved into this really cool sort of chalet, sort of like a A-frame ski lodge type house. They lived right across the street from my grandparents, my mother's mom and dad, and they lived there until my grandfather. My grandfather passed away, and then my grandmother got very ill, and they started taking care of her and taking care of her and taking care of her, and then it made sense that they move in with her and help her because she needed more care than they could give. Even being across the street, she needed somebody to be there with them because she kept falling down and breaking things and hurting herself. And that was a really interesting and tough time for them because they sacrificed so much, and yet the family gave them a ton of grief and thought they had come in and taken over that house so they could have that house. And I will tell anybody listening that you don't know shit about that story. That will piss me off for the rest of my days, because you guys out there who know what I'm talking about know that my parents did good. They were there to help my grandmother, and they took care of her, and they did a great, great job taking care of her. They sacrificed everything. They moved into a bedroom and let her stay in that house, even though they bought that house. They bought that house. They didn't take that house from her. They bought that house. They made payments on that house and continued to take care of her and let her live there until she died. And so much chaos came from that. And I don't mind sharing this on my podcast because there are, sadly, people in my family who believe that my parents hornswoggled my grandmother out of her house. And that's not the case at all. They bought her house and they let her stay there until she was unable to stay there, and took care of her until virtually the very last breath. My mom continued to go to visit her at a rest home, and she and my dad were always at odds, of course, because of the difficulty of living in that situation. And my grandmother admittedly had some issues, and she would tell stories that were not true. And I know this because I witnessed this. I saw how different my grandmother would be depending on who she was talking to. And yet I witnessed my parents doing all this amazing work for my grandmother when they didn't have to, and they did it because my dad was a good guy, was a very, very good guy. Yeah, broken like all of us, messed up like all of us, was trying to fill the God-sized hole like all of us, immature and incomplete like all of us, forever 19 like all of us, right? This is humanity. My dad was a good guy, a really, really good guy. So after my grandmother passed away, there was this feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could get a few good years before he passed away. And that wasn't to be. That wasn't to be. So after basically a life of sacrifice, my father died in his house. And that really sucks. I'm okay with it in the sense of this is life and this is how things work. And I get that. I really get that. Nobody's owed anything, Our family's a Christian family. So one of the things I think about on a constant basis is the fact that I could have, and I have had very good business successes in life, and I've had giant business failures. And there is no such thing as deserve, to quote Clint Eastwood from Unforgiven. Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You don't deserve anything. You just do your very best. And my dad did his very best. When we lived in Wenatchee and he got a job in Tonasket, he drove the 98 miles every day, 98 miles one way to go to work while we lived in Wenatchee. That's the truth. My dad drove. At the time, we didn't live in Tonasket, and he wasn't working in Tonasket. He was working in a town called Omak, which is just south of Tonasket. But he drove 98 miles to Wenatchee and back. Wenatchee to Omak in the morning, and then Omak to Wenatchee at night. Literally every day for like a year until we moved to Tonasket. My dad was super, super committed, super hardworking till the end. He was that guy, and he kept to himself. And I think a lot of people didn't know what to make of him because he was, again, I call him the slight introvert. He wasn't introverted. He was actually a very, very outgoing guy, very fun, very funny, very goofy. And when I say funny, I mean cheesy funny, not necessarily funny as in a great comedian, but dorky funny, tell a really crappy joke and then would look at you waiting for you to laugh at the punchline. And you had no choice but to laugh. You had to laugh because he wouldn't stop looking at you until he got some sort of response, which was annoying as hell. But I digress. It's a wonderful memory because I would take it back any day right now. I would have him sitting right here across from me telling stupid fart jokes if he wanted to, if I could keep him here instead of losing him to the ether. And I've lost him to the ether, and it sucks. I know I mentioned our family's a Christian family. Christianity isn't something that I would say was something my dad spoke about a lot or talked about his faith or talked about what he thought would happen after he died. And yet I know my father believed in Christ being the Savior. I know he certainly believed in a creator. He didn't believe any of this was an accident or some scientific explanation that science can't explain. There's a reason they call it the missing link, because there is no link, because there's nothing missing. But that's for another argument and another time. All I know is my father believed. And I'm grateful that he and my mother chose to raise us the way they did, because I am probably the most unethical and immoral Christian man you'll ever meet. But I am a Christian, and I will proudly claim it, and I will not run away from it. And my dad was the same way. He wasn't pious, Actually, I take right after him because I am not pious. I will say fuck with the best of them. Fuck, 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 fuck. Okay? I don't give a shit about saying fuck. And you shouldn't either, because if it offends you that much, well, you have bigger problems. Jesus is really okay. If God created the universe and God created the world, I think one fuck won't hurt any of us. But again, I digress. My dad was not a pious man, but he was a wonderful, God-fearing man, and he knew what he believed was important. And he made sure he took care of my brother and I, and my wife, my wife, and my mother. And what's beautiful about that is it emanated down, right? It emanated into my children and into my spouse and into my grandchildren and into his great-grandchildren, right? All the way down the line. And again, this isn't a religious conversation, and this isn't about Christianity even. It's just saying my father stood for something and he emanated it quietly. All his failures and all his mistakes were always quashed by the fact that he was a good man. And he did so many good things, but that silence still emanated, right? The beauty of who he was came out of him in little beautiful waves. He was kind and loving and caring. He was a prankster. He was silly and goofy. He was annoying. He was loving. He was combative. He was fiercely independent and yet highly codependent. He was a complete anomaly. He was completely frustrating and completely wonderful. And, I don't know what to say. I guess the only thing I can say that I know because I experienced it was in the last month before he passed away, he had a tremendous amount of love to give. And he really knew he had experienced something great, that no matter he had not achieved what he wanted to achieve in life, whatever that was. I have no idea whether it was riches, fame, some bullcrap version of what he thought success was or what that meant. But what he knew he achieved was he had raised two men who loved him and he loved, and he had partnered with an amazing spouse, my mother, who he loved with absolute unbridled passion, and that I know she loved back. And before he died, I had a chance to interview him, which I was thinking I was going to post, and I'm not going to post. That's just for me. But I had a chance to hear him tell stories and to actually divulge some secrets to me. And I'm so, so grateful to have heard some of his stories from his perspective, how he felt about his mother and his father, what he wished had occurred between them, what he longed for in life and success, what he was going to miss. He talks about missing his children, his grandchildren getting older, his great-grandchildren growing up. It was heartbreaking to him when he talked about his great-grandchildren and my children, which I do have 6 children, and 3 are still at home, and they're little. He cried about those kids, saying he wished he could be here long enough to watch them grow. And I guess that's the frustration of any older person. There's always some young kid that's growing up that you're never going to see get there. And that was his. That really, really bothered him. But what he said that I thought was lovely is, and that I'd never heard, honestly. I knew he loved my mother. I knew he loved her completely. And they very clearly, they were affectionate. But he kept saying how much a gem my mother was, how much he loved her in a way he couldn't express, and that she was just like a superhero. She was a superhero to him. And he would cry when he would talk about how special he felt. And I realized at that moment that my dad, the hole had been filled, and it was my mom. It, it was my mom. So, I don't know if my mom will hear this, but I'm so grateful to her because she gave my dad the one thing he never had. And so, I just want to say to everybody listening, thank you for listening and loving us and loving my family and letting me tell you these stories and letting you get pissed off and letting you cry, sharing that with me. I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss him so much. So much. And so what I would invite you to do now as I stop is listen to a song. A friend of mine who I had talked to recently, Jonathan Plum, he and another songwriter, Rafe Perlman, wrote a lovely tune called Even the Stars. And it's from an album they put out a few years back in 2013 called Dust and Gold. And I'm going to play this song at the end here. And I would invite you to have the courage to listen to the whole thing. Just listen to the song and imagine it touching you in a way I think it touches me, which is deep down in my core. And even though I know the song, of course, isn't written about my father, it's not even the lyrics. It's not the lyrics, guys. It's the music. Listen to the elegance of the music and listen to the ethereal nature of the song and listen to how transcendent it is because it is truly that. This song is transcendent. And if there's any one thing to me that represents what it must be like to have lived a full life and to step off into the heavenly ether and to greet our Lord in heaven, it would be this song. So thank you for listening. Please enjoy this song. And I'm going to end with this. I'm going to say goodbye. And I love you, Dad. I love you so much.
Stars gather at my ceiling. Awake while I've been sleeping. I was dreaming there you. Where do we go now? And who hears a crow sound? Pick up that whale's tail to pick up my sails now and sail me to you, to all this ado. Sail me to you in this passing through now. We're just passing through. Where do we go now? The crow is an old soul, picks at the bones of this record that skips stones. Sail me to you, we're just passing through now. Sail me to you, to all this ado. 'Cause even the stars don't have a clue. Well, how about you? Yeah, even the stars shine as you are. They shine just for you. They shine just for you. Through dust and gold now, the echoes that showed how Lord,